about a bit more elaborately, but you should also have received the slides anyway, so if you want to, look at some issues again, that should be fine. So this questionnaire, this thing that we use, this instrument that we use to collect our data, this questionnaire usually consists of a couple of building blocks. So you usually have a short introduction, you say again something about the purpose maybe of the study, you show appreciation for people participating in the study, things like that, to make people feel comfortable. And that goes for a face-to-face interview situation as well as for an online interview. It's always nice to get people to this situation. Usually a questionnaire consists of different modules that are sorted according to themes. It doesn't make sense to jump a lot between different issues and different aspects that you're interested in. So if you're doing socio-demographics, have them all at one place and not each here, then ask about political issues, then ask about education, then ask about economic issues, and then ask about gender. It doesn't make much sense, It's always nice to have some ice-breaking questions in the beginning to make sure that people get into the survey mode. Again, welcome them in the survey and give them a sense of what they should be doing. So maybe in the 1 or 2 icebreaking session it makes sense also to play around with question formats where people sometimes have to cross something or to check something or to slide something when it's online. Use different formats there just to make them familiar with the techniques. This is a bit of a fuzzy thing which sometimes is about keep the suspense, keep people interested in the survey. Sometimes little text in between can be quite helpful to tell them again what they're doing and why they're doing this, things like that. Then usually you have filter questions and surveys. Again, we'll look at examples of that in a second, which makes sure that respondents only answer questions that they should be answering. Again, example in a second, otherwise it takes too long. Make sure that you've got good transitions between modules. If you ask about immigration here and then about economic issues here, don't just jump to the next question, but give them a sentence to say, hey, and now we'll be talking about immigration issues. So what do you think about ABC? It could just be a sentence, but make sure that happens and that they're not jumping too much. Usually we measure socio-demographics last because they're very easy for respondents to answer. They don't require a lot of cognitive processing, so we keep them for the last moment to make it a bit easier for them than to complete the rest of the survey. And then there's interviewer questions sometimes in the survey. Often, for instance, in face-to-face surveys, you wouldn't have a question about the gender of the person. You wouldn't ask someone, it would be very strange if I asked, so are you a male or female? But you would ask the interviewer to actually just fill it in. So that's different components you would find in surveys. We'll go through some of those. Again, I'll be a bit quicker now. So you've got question items, measuring attitudes, measuring behaviors, and this could be behavior attentions or recall of behaviors also, values, beliefs, emotions, knowledge, anything you could be interested in for your research project, psychological constructs, which are usually bigger batteries of questions, and so on and so forth. So anything you can think of can potentially probably be put into a survey if you can turn it into some sort of question or statement with a few limitations that we'll go into in a second. And then of course there's socio-demographic questions, sometimes there's control questions. Control questions in the sense of making sure that people actually answer the survey in a good way. So what we, just to give you an idea, what we do when we do online surveys where we have multimedia components built in, so respondents are required to watch a short video. We would have a quick question before that comes to make sure that their sound is turned on the computer. So you ask them to play a button, a sound plays, or on the click a sound plays, And then there's a question: did you hear a bird, a doorbell ring, or a telephone, or whatever it was? You know. So you can make sure that the sound was actually turned on when they would watch the video the next time. Sometimes, especially on online service, we tend to have a lot of people nowadays that just give very quickly all answers without thinking about it to get the incentive, basically, to earn money. Right? A huge problem with online service, and there's many people out there that, you know, partly earn their living by doing these things. And also for that you can try to enter control questions. For instance, what we did, I don't have it on the slides, unfortunately, I forgot about it. One question about your favorite hobby comes at the very beginning, and it's a very long question. So it's 5-6 sentences. So people are having different ways to spend their leisure time. And leisure time, you know, that is the time after work, and that you can free to do many different things. And we are now interested in how you like to spend your leisure time. What are your main... It's a long question. And then you've got 20 different answer categories. And the last part, the last sentence of the question reads, please use the answer category horseback riding. Or swimming. So in the last part of the question, we will tell the respondent what he should answer. That allows us to check. That it basically tells us that everyone who's not answering swimming, in that case, didn't read the question. And just, you know, gave an answer. That, by the way, eliminates usually about 20% of the sample. Just this one question. You know, people just, well, next one. I want to get done with this. So there's control types of questions that you can use to make sure that your data quality is actually okay. And I think especially in online settings where we've got very little control about who's answering questions and why they're answering questions, with what motivation, it makes a lot of sense to use these control type of questions. Attitude question. How good or bad is it for a country to have a law against racial and ethnic discrimination in the workplace? Extremely bad to extremely good. Behavioral question. Compared to other people of your age, how often would you say you take part in social activities? More than much, less than most, about the same, or asking you, you know, what you do actually on a regular basis. And many of the examples I have today are coming from the European Social Survey, by the way, because that's very broad and very... we've got measurement instructions usually in place. Thanks so much. Measurement instructions or measurement issues usually in place in questionnaire contents. So again, interviewer instructions, filters, sometimes questions to loosen up the situation. If you've been asking about very sensitive or difficult issues, it's nice to have other questions in there. Response time latency measurement is something we do online, particularly for every question. Measure how long does the respondent take to answer the question. That's other things that you would find in questionnaires. This is actually a nice example of a mix of an interviewer question and a filtered question. So these questions, the block J in this case in the survey, are only asked to the interviewer. You know, it's face-to-face situation in this case. Was anyone else present who interfered with the interview? Yes, no. Hey, and this is a filter. Because the next question, who was this, does only make sense to ask if the interviewer said yes here. Yeah? So if 1, yes, ask J6. If 2, go to J7. Right? These are classic filter questions. And they are often very useful to have because you spare respondents a lot of time answering questions that they shouldn't be answering. So if I am, which I often am, interested in media exposure, I ask someone, do you watch television news? If that person says no, done, not interested anymore in television. If that person says yes, I'm going to ask him or her about which channels do you use, how often do you use those channels, how attentive are you to politics when you use those channels. A lot of questions really that the other respondents just can skip if he answers no. So think about these things, because they are sometimes make this questionnaires much more efficient and quicker to complete. And then the interviewer, in this case, who was this, has to answer whether the husband, wife, partner was present at the interview, the son, daughter. That's something the interviewer would do. Again, there's often some of these questions, especially in face-to-face or telephone situations. I mean, otherwise there's no interview, then it doesn't make sense. But face-to-face, telephone, there is an interviewer, and you can ask the interviewer to provide information, also about the interview. So if you have the impression the respondent was taking the interview seriously, for instance, it can be something quite informative. Again, so questions sometimes use cards or images to show certain things. Psychological tests, randomized question word experiments, and I also show examples of these. So especially in face-to-face situations, but also sometimes in online or mail situations, you would provide people with visualizations of the answer options. And this is actually the card. So the interviewer has cards with him, and these cards have printed information on them. And so if the interviewer is asked a question, copy, he has a little laptop, so the question appears on the laptop, but immediately tells him, now take card 18. Would you say it's generally bad or good for a country's economy that people come to live here from other countries? Please use this card. And then the respondent gets a visualization of the answer options, bad for the economy to good for the economy. Right? So these cards are very commonly used. I looked at the European Social Survey this morning again, and I think there's about 40, 50 cards that interviewers bring actually to these face-to-face surveys. Example of a psychological test was a bit difficult to find, really, because the surveys do not do much of really thorough psychological testing. And what usually are these psychological tests are characterized by very long item batteries that then are used to measure one single construct, which is, in the social sciences we do that less often because we often don't have the space to do so. This is the classic F scale by Adorno. It's the authoritarianism scale which they came up with, and this is the original version. I mean, this is a short thing that they came up with in the 1950s to measure authoritarianism, with the A to explain, having fled from Nazi Germany, how and why some people would behave as they behaved in their time. So you have, in this case, 58 items, and those 58 items cover obedience, respect, willpower, bad manners, relating to one. It's interesting questions you could. And generally, these psychological tests have these very long item batteries, which we often can't be using, shouldn't be using. But it happens from time to time in survey research. Yeah.
Just to go back to the card question, we use it in Bihar and Bengal, but we use it without card because of the issue of illiteracy in India. So if you give people card, so
they wouldn't be able.
They might not work in the context.
Very good. It's very good that you're saying that, because that brings me to this one.
Yes.
These images, especially if you deal with illiterate or difficult populations, populations that have difficulty reading or writing, images can be very, very fruitful to use. Got a couple of examples now. This is, I know it's hard to see from the back. What kind of living environment would you prefer if you were free to choose? And then you've got, very old style homes, modernistic kinds of homes, telling you something maybe about the personality of the person you're talking to. How much do you think the policies of the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats actually differ? And this is a nice, for someone who would have difficulties comprehending very much to very little, or difficulties reading those words, this could be a very nice illustration for them to give an answer. Some of these questions I, by the way, translated from German yesterday, so they might not be sounding very good in your ears. But that's the examples I had. how much financial pressure do you feel due to the new tax increase? This is a lot of pressure. This is very little pressure, right? So this is fairly abstract, you know. It's not showing pressure in a way, but you know, it's the big black M cubicle versus the small light cubicle. How quickly would you say time passes when you're at work? So 1 would mean that time almost stands still, while 7 means that time is passing very quickly. Yeah, you could just have the 1 to 7 scale, but illustrating it maybe makes it easier for all respondents to relate to this question and answer this question. And I think it's a good comment that in the Indian context, especially if you go to rural areas, these types of techniques might be, or if you go to villages in Kenya, these types of techniques might be very, very useful to implement actually. And as you see, you can get very creative in the different ways you're using these. To which extent do the feelings expressed by the characters correspond with your own feelings towards the product? Marketing kind of stuff. You know? Pick one. And behind each of these they will be coded. So they are common expressions that I think are universally coded, and you would find disgust and anger and shame and happiness and whatever behind these pictures. Inspiration. How inspired do you feel by looking at this? How disgusted do you feel by looking at this? Again, these are allegedly, and again I'm a bit unsure about the Indian context, but allegedly these are very universally coded, some of these, and should work in very different, you're nodding, right? Should work in very different cultural contexts. Apparently there's something we all have to Please now place an X on the dartboard to indicate how your life has been in the past 2 weeks with regard to how you want it to be in matters of play. And X is the bullseye, in the bullseye indicates you live exactly like you wanted your life to be. The further away from the bullseye that the place your X represents the amount of difference between the last 2 weeks and what you value. Outside the outer rings, blah blah blah. Yeah? Again, I don't think it's a very good example, but it's again an example how you can visualize this. There would be many more of these examples. Some of the online surveys give you ready-made visualizations. If you want to measure happiness, for instance, Qualtrics has the smiley faces ranging from this to this. No? So some of these are being implemented into more standardized techniques.
Newspapers are using this for feedbacks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think this is going to become much more common. I think the more we go online, the much easier it is. I mean, for feeling thermometers, how much do you like party X or Y? You know, you get sliders nowadays for online surveys, so you can slide a thing from very blue to very red, and you even have a little scale behind that goes from little to much. So it's a lot of visualization really that should enhance the data quality. And that's very easy again to implement online. This is one of the examples of a question wording experiment that has been used in the VSS, but I know we'll only talk about experiments tomorrow, but you know, we're on a borderline here basically, because these are being implemented in service nowadays quite regularly. It's all based on groundbreaking work that Paul Snyderman has been doing in the 1990s in the United States related to race, where he was using question wording experiments in surveys to figure out racial resentments and reasons for racial attitudes. And it's been very regularly used nowadays. I'll come to the advantages of doing this tomorrow a little bit more for experimental research. What we often find in surveys really is, you know, there's not a lot of variation between what's happening here. but a few things are varied. A few details of the questions are different, and then a random sample of your entire group that you asked. Some people get that version of the question, some people get that version of the question, some people that version, and some people that version. And you can look at whether, based on these subtle differences in question wording, you get different answers. Again, more on experimental designs tomorrow. But here the example is using the, please tell me to what extent do you think your country should allow professionals from poor European countries, providing a large number of migrants, so you would fill in the, this would probably be Bulgaria at this point. So to what extent do you think Austria should allow professionals from Bulgaria to come to live in Austria? Do you think Austria should allow professionals from poor countries outside Europe, providing the large number of immigrants, which in the Austrian case, I wouldn't even know what that would be, to live in Austria? So this was about professionals in poor country in Europe, poor country outside Europe. This is about laborers, which is a different term really to describe what's happening maybe. Again, from poor European countries and from poor countries outside Europe. So by comparing the answers to these 4 questions, we're able to say something about whether people are more willing to accept professionals from poor countries within Europe compared to laborers from poor countries in Europe compared to poor countries outside Europe, and so on and so forth. Very little variation in the questions, giving potentially very interesting results. So this is one of these question wording experiments that is easy to conduct nowadays with CARTI techniques, but which is even more easy to do on online settings. You know, where you just divert people at some point randomly to 4 different versions of the question. And we've been doing this quite a bit actually. Read the stuff by Paul. Again, playing the big names. Paul was in my PhD committee actually, but read The Outsider from Paul Snyderman if you're interested in racial migration attitudes and racial resentment. I think it's a great book, and 2001, so it's quite old already. It looks at Italy, but it makes a very interesting general point, I think. When it comes to these questions, one thing I'd really like to do, don't reinvent the wheel. Don't reinvent the wheel when you write a questionnaire. There's a lot of questionnaires out there. There's a lot of questions out there that people have pre-tested, that have been used in numerous studies for measuring numerous concepts. So it's really, you know, don't start from scratch and think, how do I measure this, how do I measure this, but have a look around what is actually already existing, what has been published, what has been done in prior data collections. Saves you a lot of time, for one, and for publication purposes it might be much more convincing if you say, hey, I'm using the measurement for my concept identical to the measurement that X, Y, and Z used in other publications already. To reviewers, this will be looking more sound than coming up with your own questions. There's many resources out there. Again, data archives to look at, the questionnaires that are being published. There's also books, the measures of political attitudes, the measures of personality and social psychological constructs, communication research measures of religiosity. That's usually these thick books that collect, compare, validate a lot of existing measurement for surveys. These are very expensive books, so I'm not quite sure whether you would get them everywhere. But if you have them, some issues, they could be a great resource to look at. I once did a small project on religiosity, and I didn't know anything about measuring religiosity. This book was a revelation in terms of, being aware of all the different that one could actually cover. So take that into consideration.